Michigan's primary sets up November's election. Regional transit may finally have a shot. Donald Trump heading to Detroit and causing GOP civil war. And what about those third-party candidates? Both Stephen and Nolan are here. MiWeek starts right now.
Did you know Roush Enterprises was selected by Google to assemble a test fleet of 100 prototype self-driving cars in 2015? It also produced the new Domino's delivery cars. And speaking of Domino's, Domino's sells well over 2 million pizzas per day around the world, and half of their sales are digital. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.
Hi there. Welcome to MiWeek. I'm Christine McDonald. We are so glad that you're joining us. You know our contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. You know, it's been a while since we've all been together at the big desk. So what's new, guys?
Primary week, right?
Was new. Poll out today. We have a new poll out today, and it looks like Hillary Clinton's beating Donald Trump like a rented mule in Michigan.
That and the fact that it's already August. It feels like the summer has gone by. It's gone by pretty quickly.
Kids got to school late, and they go back early.
They go back early, and so I expect the schools and education conversations to start brewing the next couple of weeks.
Well, it'll be interesting actually to see how Detroit Public Schools, now that it's in the middle of this transition.
Right.
I haven't heard much in terms of their recruitment efforts to try to get kids in. Previous years, by now, you're having like the Blue Door campaign, other campaigns. They're going to have to fill seats. It's really important that they get their kids in school.
Right.
Historically, years after there's a work stoppage in the schools, a strike or whatever, there was a sick out this year, they have lost significant numbers of kids in the fall because parents just decide that's enough. If that happens this year, it really jeopardizes
the uncertainty,
the financial thing. But can you really blame them too? Because if you have such uncertainty going on, I mean, you really can't blame the parents. All right, well, we have a lot to talk about today. Coming up tonight, we're going to be looking at those primary results and some of the surprises. Also coming up, finally, a compromise to get the regional transit question on the ballot. But what are the hopes now of it passing? And the presidential race, more calls for Republicans to back away from Trump, a new Michigan poll out that Nolan mentioned, and we'll explore the possibility of a third-party surge. But we are going to start with the primary results from this week in Michigan. And it's a pretty big year because of term limits. There will be turnover in the state house, 42 of 110 seats. But because of the way the districts are, historically Republican or Democrat, some of the races were pretty much decided on Tuesday in terms of some of the state house races, Nolan.
Well, I don't know if you can say that. I mean, that's traditionally what you would think. But in a presidential year, if there's a huge drop-off support, if there's a huge fall-off in support for either party, you can't count on those traditional assumptions about these districts holding too. You could see, a year like we saw in 2004 or 2010, where everything goes out the window.
Do you think there's more of a toss-up this year than people assume?
I don't know. It's really hard to see a lot of districts where they're going to be competitive in November. I don't think there are more than we have had in the last two cycles under this map. Democrats still think they might have a shot at taking the House because of I guess there are 9 seats that they think they can get away from Republicans. But I don't know. I don't think this map is terribly competitive, and we're early in the cycle. Usually, what happens is you draw the map in the 0 year. Takes effect in the 2 year. It's usually by the 8 year and the 0 year again that it's not reflective of the population. The 6 year is sort of where it, I think, has the most effect.
But a lot of these people were voted in 2010 in that Tea Party wave. A lot of them were voted in traditionally Democratic districts that aren't as reliably even Republican even after the redraw. And so you have some 30-some open seats where no incumbent's running. And so I think that makes it a lot harder to predict. I think it's a toss-up.
You know, a couple things to also look at coming out of the primary was 2 congressional districts, so the 10th and also looking at the 1st. And we were all talking a little bit about the fact that looking at the outsiders coming in those races. What did you make of those two?
Well, I think they're different. I mean, I don't know that I would lump the 1st and the 10th together. I think in the 1st, there's no question that you've got this very appealing outsider who is a very straight talker, who a retired Marine,
former Marine,
colonel.
a businessman.
I mean, he's got a lot to appeal to the sort of disaffected voter and to, I think, sort of lockstep Republicans, challenging two sort of establishment Republicans who had mixed records in terms of who's more moderate. They had both done things in the past that had angered Republican voters. I think we probably should have put more stock in Jack Bergman than we did going into it. It wasn't that close.
No, he went away with it, and that's when Binishak took that seat in that primary, Jason Allen, who was among the lawmakers defeated, it was just a handful of votes behind him, and man, he finished a far out third. And so I think, though, that district is now going to get a lot of national attention.
It is.
A lot of money was going to come in there anyway, because Lon Johnson is married to one of Obama's top fundraisers. A lot of money was going to come into that district, but now I think the DNCC will put a lot of emphasis. That's a traditionally Democratic district or area that they can take back. In the 10th, where you had Paul Mitchell making his second.
And that was Candace Miller's seat.
Candace Miller's seat. I thought you had 3 lawmakers or former lawmakers in it, and they may have divided sort of their votes from their districts and gave Paul Mitchell an opening, but he won fairly handily, spent a lot of money to do it.
I was just going to say, I think that's an interesting story about how much money he has spent. Now, he ran in the 4th, and he spent over $2 million there, and he did not win, and then he moved to the 10th, and now he spent about over $2 million this time around as well.
I think it was 3.5.
So what does that say?
I'm not sure what it's. I mean, I don't know what to make of why he was able to beat Phil Pavlo, who is, a very popular establishment Republican, a guy who holds office but does not really disappoint Republican voters very frequently. So, Paul Mitchell is more of an unknown, I think, just because he's never held office. He
didn't live in the district.
He doesn't really live in the district. He's very eager to go to Congress, which he's shown by running in 2 different districts in 2 different cycles.
I don't know why you would spend $7 million over these 2 races for that. I mean, what amounts to a pretty lousy job.
Everyone likes the idea of it before they get there, and then they figure out that.
But it might have hurt that or helped him that there were 3 lawmakers in that race. Each had districts and loyal supporters in there, and they divided those up. And
but back
he walked
to the
away
1st,
with it.
I think one of the things that's interesting in the 1st is one of I thought one of the real strong criticisms that could be made of Lon Johnson in the general was that he lives in the district, he's from the district, but he's,
Mostly
lives in
here.
Detroit.
Yeah.
I mean, he's lived in Detroit for some time. That's now off the table by having Jack Bergman, who's also sort of a I live in lots of places guy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not going to be an effective criticism.
No, that's right.
And that could change the balance of what the Republicans sort of are able to do.
I think that's going to get a lot of attention. I also think if you look now at given the possible drag on the ticket by the presidential nominee, I think if you look at that Wahlberg district, I think a lot of money is going to pour into there. And if they take 2 seats here, you've suddenly got a 7-7 congressional delegation, something you haven't had here in a long time.
All right, a couple of interesting things coming out. But something that also has a shot at being on the ballot this November is the regional transit millage. After some big objections last week from Macomb and Oakland counties about the governance of the RTA, specifically the voting structure, also monitoring the spending of the transit tax in each county, a compromise was reached this week. They are now voting on new ballot language. It's still a 1.2 mil property tax increase, about $95 per average home a year. It's expected to raise $4.7 billion over the next 20 years. Now this was this was quite an uproar over the last week, and they are still, and we do tape the show a little bit earlier on Thursday, and as we speak right now, that they are voting on this last ballot language.
I just saw before we started that they voted to put it on.
Okay, so it is now going to be on the ballot. My first question is now that it's going to be on the ballot, the fact that it took so long to kind of get it this way, and that there was consternation on multiple sides, specifically from the county executives in Macomb and Oakland, and they say that they are not going to actively campaign for it, but yes, we can let the voters decide. Does this now have a chance of passing? And I'm going to start with you on this, Stephen.
It has a chance. I mean, and certainly the RTA folks talk about their internals suggesting that that they have a chance. They wouldn't have put it on the ballot, frankly, if they didn't think they had an opportunity. But there is a lot of selling that needs to be done, and the question is who's going to do it, right? If Brooks Patterson and Mark Hackel are not going to do it in Macomb and Oakland, then who's the voice that can reach out to those voters? We are going to do at the Free Press a very heavy lift this fall, looking specifically at communities in both of those counties and talking about how badly they need transit. I mean, this always gets drawn as a suburban versus Detroit problem, but with the growth of poverty and isolation in the southern parts of both Macomb and Oakland, it's a suburban issue as well. And there are enough people who need better transit, business owners, poor people, schools, people getting to schools to vote for this, but there has to be a more aggressive and well-packaged sales pitch.
You know, in all the coverage of the last week, in terms of when there was so much a problem with the wording and with some of the government structure, Nolan, people were saying, we don't have regional cooperation. If these guys can't get behind this, did you see some of the problems that they had with this?
Yeah, I think that was sort of knee-jerk. I mean, if you look at this RTA was sort of set up to fail almost from the beginning with its structure, but the specific objections they had, that, by the way, were all worked out in the compromise. For the most part, Hackel and Patterson got their issues resolved, and a lot of the issues they raised make it more likely that this thing will pass, because there were 500,000 people in Oakland County who were pretty much getting nothing in exchange for like $700 million in tax payments. And why would they go to the polls and vote for this? I think, you know, one of the problems with RTA, one of the objections we've had to it from the beginnings or concerns, is that it sets up these four entities to be competitors indefinitely. It should have blended these systems a little more cleanly, instead of everybody's now grabbing for a chunk of the money, and that's going to continue to be that way. We need one tax, one system. And you can't do that, of course, because of federal labor law and et cetera. But I think you go to the polls and you're asking people to pay another tax for another bus system, it's always going to be a tough sell. And if they only talk about this as a bus system serving a traditional bus customer, you know, the people who don't have cars or the poor,
well, but it's not.
You've got to sell the idea that this is a regional system that's going to take everybody out of their cars and make bus commuting an acceptable option for all levels of community.
And a regional system that's going to take a long time to grow. This isn't something that we're going to say, oh, in 5 years from now, we're going to have this.
So some of these complaints are bogus, and they're bogus for a number of reasons. One is that we've been talking about this for 2 years. This didn't just come up in the last 2 weeks. None of these objections were raised over that.
They didn't get the plan until the 1st of June, Steve.
Okay, so the 1st of June. Now you're raising objections again at the last minute, saying, here's why all of a sudden we can't go along with this. The voting structure has been in place for 2 years. Now all of a sudden it's not okay with Hackel and Patterson. That's not about voting.
They didn't get the plan to June 1st, and they raised their objections during the comment period.
But the voting structure has been in place for 2 years,
and
now all of a sudden
they have been raising objections since 2015. And in working out these objections.
But here's the other issue. The other issue is that they continue to look at this in terms of what's in it for me. What's in it for me? What's in it for this guy? What's in it for this guy? And that is the thing that has held us back around this region for 50 years. That is not how you build a transit system. There's no transit system in the country that was built looking at what every single individual community gets out of it. It is a question of the regional health and ability of economic transfer to take place via public transit. Hackle and Patterson are throwing back to the people who scuttled regional transit in the 70s when we had $600 million on the table from the federal government, and the suburbs said, "Nah, we can't go along with that."
They had, Steve, they had legitimate,
and it doesn't happen.
They had legitimate objections that made this
I don't
plan
think they were
stronger and more
illegitimate.
sellable. I don't see how you can tell 500,000 people you're getting nothing, but you should vote for this anyway. If the idea is to create a transit system like other cities have, other regions have, where anybody can get on it,
What they were saying was,
where people get out of their cars.
Let's be clear. Those people weren't being told they were going to get nothing. They were saying in the
virtually
early phase,
nothing. No,
right? This
over
is phase
20
one.
years.
Yeah, well, it's going to take
over 20 years. They were paying in $700 million
We're 50
and
years behind.
and getting like 40 million back.
But we're 50 years behind.
Nobody's going to vote for that.
Unless you want to fund this at double the rate that we want to pay, that people are talking about, then you can't get to those people by that.
They brought those people up to 118 million without adding a dime to the revenue by shifting the money around.
Would you say that the compromises that were achieved in the last week would make this more passable or more palatable for people in those counties that the RTA would need those votes?
They might, but so would a much more coherent sales pitch to those people. You're going to have to go around their leadership, and leadership is not a word I would generally ascribe to them on this issue, but you're going to have to go around them and go directly to the people and sell them on the idea that that this is necessary, that this will help not just the people who are directly benefiting from the lines, but the entire county.
Okay, so now do they start now? Hang on, do they start on overdrive now? Because how many months do we have until the election?
Well, I mean, frankly, it's not that late. I mean, you would start your push in September, just like everybody else, after Labor Day. They'll have almost the entire month of August to do it. The thing that frustrates me the most about this is that, I'm somebody who's lived in other communities, Chicago, Baltimore, Washington. These are not much more progressive communities than ours in so many ways, but in terms of transit, it's night and day. Okay,
the transit's been held up here for 50 years.
And so these guys want to now nickel and dime the one chance that we've had to get forward.
Is it nickel and dime, or is it saying what are we going to get for our money?
The changes they forced in the management structure and the decision-making structure will give this thing a greater chance of working and force them to cooperate and compromise rather than sort of ganging up against each other and everybody trying to wheel and deal for the 5 votes. This forces them to work together and make decisions for the good of the region and not for individual communities. I think it's a much better plan.
All right, the focus of the presidential race this week has been on Donald Trump, and not only his erratic attacks on people, some slow fundraising, which has now gotten a little bit bigger, but clashing again with his own party leadership with so much negativity. And let's face it, while Hillary Clinton has nowhere near the same troubles as Trump, she struggles with a trustworthy factor that has more people seriously looking at third-party candidates. I do want to talk about the possibility of third-party candidates. Before we get to that, though, I do want to talk about the poll that was out in the Detroit News today, looking at not just the number matchup between Donald Trump, but let's go ahead and take a look at that right now. Michigan voters, Clinton 41%, Trump 32%. That's not totally surprising to me coming off of the convention, but what surprised me in your poll, Nolan, or the paper's poll, was the qualification numbers. That 61% of people in Michigan said that Trump is not qualified to be president. 57% of people said Hillary Clinton is qualified to be president.
And there's 2 storylines there for me. I don't know how you improve your number, how you go much beyond the 39% or whatever that was. I mean, it's stunning to me that more people are voting for him than think he's qualified for office. That's a big number to overcome. Our pollster called it sort of a historic number in that regard, that many people thinking he's he's unqualified for office. I think that's the big storyline here. The other one is, of course, from the beginning, one of lost opportunity. If you look at her numbers, her negatives are as high as his, her unfavorability rating. She's not performing as well in some groups as she should be, and yet, she is soundly beating him here. I think almost any Republican, other than Donald Trump, would be performing much better in Michigan. But Republicans have Donald Trump, so what's that going to mean down the ticket? How much damage is a presidential candidate who draws in the 30s going to do to Republicans running for House races, running for Congress, running? I mean, we could see a year like 2004 when Republicans were wiped out up and down the ballot.
So
2006.
Yeah.
Right. So what makes sense then for Republicans at this point? Because you see Trump fighting with leadership all during the week. And I mean, again, the news cycle of what's been happening with his campaign and the infighting in his campaign, and Paul Ryan kind of still stepping back and not really saying much. What would it take for Republican leadership like a Paul Ryan to come out and be like, you know what? I don't endorse this guy. This guy's not it. Republicans should all.
He's on the edge.
Republicans should just totally pull back from this and say, you know what, this is a wash for us this year.
Yeah, I don't know.
They can't do that
Right.
because
The
they don't
danger of
want to
that
wipe
is
the
you
party
get
out.
wiped out. I mean, now then you're. I mean, you're
What's
already.
worse, getting wiped out or getting wiped out with Donald Trump?
Well, that's
I don't know.
always been
That's
the
a great
question. That's a question I raised in the spring. You're going to lose either way. Do you want to lose and save your party or lose and destroy him?
So the party is going to have this major reset after November anyway. I mean, he's already done enough damage to the brand, to the ideas, that you have to have the leadership, and first thing you have to do is identify who that leadership is after November. To sort of reconnoiter the whole thing. I mean, what does it mean to be a Republican? What does it mean even to be a conservative? I mean, those are ideas that are in real flux right now, not just in Michigan, but nationally. I don't think you can afford to just cut bait. I mean, there's too many candidates. There are too many things at stake.
No, they
state
won't.
houses and Congress and places like that.
And the Democrats dodged this bullet. They came awfully close to losing their control of their party to the Bernie people.
Wasn't that
Fortunately,
close?
I drew 47% of the primary
2
vote.
million voters.
But what's happened there is he's pulled the party way further than left than a lot of Democrats are comfortable with. And if you look at this poll, you've got a lot of people in the middle, people who consider themselves independents, moderates, who both parties, both Republicans and Democrats, who don't feel they have any place to go. They don't like either one of these candidates or what either one of these parties now stand for. And I think that's why, as you mentioned, this Gary Johnson
enter the Libertarians.
so-
But let me ask you this before we leave the conversation of the GOP problem with Trump. I heard on the radio today, it was Senator John McCain. A reporter asked him a question about what Trump said, and he's like, "I'm not going to answer these questions every day. I'm not going to answer to what he says every day." But don't you put yourself in that box though when you endorse someone that he's going to have
McCain
to?
endorse him?
I'm not sure McCain endorsed him. Ryan did.
Ryan
and
did. And
Trump
so
says
that's
he's
what
not
he's
He's not-
backing
that he's not backing or
McCain
Ryan or
in their
McCain.
races, which is making them mad. I mean, I think to get to your third party question, right? This question of whether a third party can sort of settle this. I
Right.
don't think that's likely. I think what is likely to happen is that you will see a new Republican Party emerge that goes pretty far away from some of the really racist and xenophobic dynamics that you have seen with Donald Trump. Think back to 4 years ago when Mitt Romney lost, and he said, listen, this is not a party that can survive only getting white males to vote for them. There are huge demographics that we don't play to at all. Now that got worse over the last 4 years and culminated in Donald Trump. What I expect that will happen in January is that it's a party that will say, what does that look like? What does that look like to appeal to women? What does it look like to appeal to Hispanics or African Americans?
Well, it's got to surgically removed the cancer that it introduced in 2010 and destroyed their chances of the presidency in 2012 by creating this sort of internecine war. You had the Tea Party come in, they beat Democrats and right away went to war with Republicans, and they're still at war. I still get emails and literature from them attacking Republicans. They're more obsessed with the Republican establishment than they are with the Democrats, and that's what's happened to that party.
So let's talk a little bit about Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, and the fact that he's polling pretty well for a third-party candidate. Is it possible if he gets that 15% right before a debate, putting him on a debate stage with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, what kind of dynamic could that change the race? And I'm not quite sure right now polling we really know, but...
Well, I mean, he's at the last nationwide poll I saw, he was at 12%. If he gets a little money, and there's some question whether the Koch brothers will give that ticket money because they're not given to Trump. If he gets a little money, reaching 12 or 15% is not that far away. You put him on a debate stage, I think he gives Republicans who are wary of Trump a place to go. Perhaps some moderate Democrats who are wary
if you
of
look
Clinton,
at Gary Johnson and some of the sort of impetuous, irascible kinds of characteristics he has, this is someone who will get on stage and fight with Donald Trump, which is what Donald Trump wants, which is what I think will turn more people away from all of that. I mean,
he might dope up before he goes out there and be nice and calm. I mean, if you look,
I mean, he
he's
says
got
crazy
some,
things too.
he says some crazy things, but you stack him against on a character basis against the other
No
two
question.
candidates,
Yeah.
and a lot of people are
not
going
the
to
other
be
two,
saying
but certainly
both
one.
the other two.
It's-
He's not been,
It's an
he's
interesting
not been as
question.
crazy as Trump, and he's not the liar Hillary Clinton is, and that are the two major issues.
Oh, good
And-
grief.
And you've got people looking for a place to put their vote.
right.
He could poll 15, 16, 17%.
We will see. It would be interesting if he ends up on the debate stage. All right, that's going to do it for us. Thanks for joining us for MiWeek. We are on Facebook, we're on Twitter, but you can find out more info about the show at MiWeek.org. Thanks for supporting Detroit Public TV. I'm Christy McDonald. We will see you next time for MiWeek. Take care.
Did you know Gordon Food Service was started by a 23-year-old entrepreneur as a butter and egg delivery business more than a century ago? In 1948, school teacher Gerard Wendell Hayworth borrowed $10,000 from his parents to start a woodworking operation in his family's garage. It's now Hayworth Incorporated. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.